Our second show of the preseason preview series. Today, we're looking at the ACC. In the last show, Mike and I, we took a look at the AAC, a lot of the questions we had for teams going into the season. And today, Mike, we've got a lot to look at in regards to the ACC, something that you and I had spoken about. There's some programs here in the ACC where there's not a lot to talk about, but we're certainly going to probably skim over a few, but we're definitely going to take a deep dive into some of these teams where some of them, there are more than one question at each program in the ACC.
Yeah, I didn't think we would go an hour in our previous show with the AAC, and now I was just kind of prepping the notes for the ACC. We might go 2 hours, potentially with this group.
Well, with the AAC, we did it a little differently. We just kind of went alphabetically right down the list throughout the conference, and it kind of balanced out the show a little bit. I think what we did this time is we took a look at some of the programs, and what we're going to do is I think we're just going to kind of tease out some of the softballs first, and then save the ones for the end where we have a lot of questions or maybe some difference of opinion between you and I in the way that we're seeing things going into the summer, into preseason camp, and what we're looking for. So, man, let's just kind of jump into it because I feel like we've got a lot of teams to get through in regards to the ACC. I said we wouldn't start out alphabetically, but here we are. We are going to start out with the BC Eagles, Mike, where John McNulty comes in, taking over as new offensive coordinator. He spent the last couple of seasons as the tight ends coach at Notre Dame. Phil Jurkovec back at quarterback, Zay Flowers back at receiver, Pat Garwo back at running back. But is anything really jumping out at you in regards to BC through some of the best ball drafts and some of the ADP data that we've looked at up until this point?
It's interesting that Zay Flowers, to me, is going lower than where he was going last year. Yet he's got his quarterback back in Phil Jurkovec. So maybe it's the hesitation with the new coaching staff and the offensive coordinator, which it's a little bit of an unknown with John McNulty. I mean, last time he was an OC was at Rutgers, which, I mean, you could blame just Rutgers for those circumstances, but they averaged, I think, 13 points a game both seasons. So while it's a small sample size, it's not a very good sample size. So it's going to be, I think, a slightly different offense. I think they're potentially going to open it up a little bit more, which bodes well for Jurkovec, assuming he's fully healthy, and Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers has got some cleaning up to do, I think. He's struggled with drops his entire career. So, but still interested in him, big play threat. He's got an ADOT over 15 every single year, I think, or 2 of the 3 maybe. So big explosive, big play threat at receiver. I'm not really interested in Pat Garwo at all, like back end of your roster at running back. I mean, he only scored 20 fantasy points once, maybe last year. I think that. And then he doesn't really catch passes, so he's not going to be a great PPR option anyways. I think maybe the guy that we're most interested in is tight end George Takis, who had, from all accounts, a really good spring. So what do you think?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that you and I talk a lot sometimes about depth chart problems and who's going to start where. The one thing we have with Boston College is depth chart clarity, right? We know clear quarterback 1, clear wide receiver 1, clear tight end 1 they bring in from Notre Dame, and Pat Garwo, even though you're not interested. We have answers with BC, which is what we can, we can't say that about every program. And you're right, maybe Flowers just isn't getting the attention throughout the best ball drafts that we've had so far throughout the spring. And you wonder if a little bit of that just has to do with the changing of the guard, the play calling, and the offensive coordinator. But we do have clarity on the depth chart at Boston College. Maybe not so much at Duke, where there are a lot of questions, and really one of the programs where we were like, man, do we really have to talk about Duke on the ACC show, right? And so, for me, Mike, and I'll start out with this one, I don't know, aside from Jordan Waters at running back, right? I don't know if there's anybody else that's really under the microscope. And really, quite honestly, and I think you would agree with this, Duke players just are not on the radar this season, at least up until this point.
No, not this season. I think it's going to be a year 0 type situation. I think 44% of the offensive production is back. They could potentially rotate quarterbacks this year. I think the two that are vying for that job, Riley Leonard and Jordan Moore, I think his name is. I think they have different skill sets. One more of a passer, one more of a runner, so they could use them both this year. Not even sure Jordan Waters is going to start at running back. Right. They have Jalen Coleman. I think they have a highly touted 3-star prospect, Terry Moore, who's coming in, who could potentially get some work. So I'm not even certain that Jordan Waters is going to start, and he's not the talent that, Mateo Durant was a year ago. So I'm not interested in this.
No, I think Duke, right now. We're basically talking about Duke, so we don't ignore them at this point, right? I mean, they're basically just in the lineup. We put them in the 2-hole just so they're kind of like a little bit forgotten. We didn't lead off with them, and we're going to get right past them, right? So
yeah, I'll add that their offensive coordinator, Kevin Johns, top 50 in pace the last 3 seasons at Memphis, and Memphis did average 30 points a game in the seasons that he was the play caller. So I think this is an offense that we can look down the line.
Yeah.
They should be able to pull in players, especially with NIL and that Duke money. So maybe down the line this might be an offense to invest in, but as of now,
well, that was going to be my final point on them, was that we're not really investing any draft capital in them, but that's not to say that we're going to rule out any mid-season waiver wire additions if we can kind of see some things play out and transition in regards to playing out. Let's, spring we thought would create a little bit more clarity down at Georgia Tech, maybe at so much at the quarterback position with Jeff Sims. What are your questions for Georgia Tech, or where are your eyes looking or concentrating on? What's under the microscope for you as we move into the preseason part for Georgia Tech?
Kind of similar to Duke. I'm not investing in this offense. I don't know how long this coaching staff personally is gonna be around. I don't know. There's a lot of changes. Yep. They're losing most of their defensive starters. I think they bring back 2 defensive starters from last year. Their defense sucked, which I guess if you're bringing back only 2 starters, maybe the only way to go is up at that point. But they're changing the offensive coordinator again. I don't see Jeff Sims I think he'll get the start to start the year, but I think it's a matter of when, not if, he gets replaced at quarterback. Zach Gibson is really accurate when he was at Akron, completing 70% of his passes. I think he's a better fit in this system. So while Jeff Sims may get the nod week 1, I don't see that lasting. So running back, I think you'll probably touch on it. It's just muddied. We don't have that clarity that you mentioned at that chart at running back. So,
yeah, well, I know, with Jeff Sims has, we talked about this yesterday with John Rice Plumlee over in the AAC show. He's got the athleticism. He's got the talent, right? The question is, can they put it together? And also you're looking at a Georgia Tech team who could struggle here throughout the ACC schedule. And, the more they struggle, the more you might see bouncing around, going from one quarterback to the other. You've got Dylan McDuffie, who they brought in after Jahmyr Gibbs transferred to Alabama. McDuffie probably went from a potential top 15 fantasy back at Buffalo to now, really not even being drafted or going in late rounds, particularly in full FBS leagues. Not really so much on our radar anymore down at Georgia Tech. And there's just not a whole lot to really look at. And I think everything really from a fantasy standpoint, if there's 2 players that we might be interested in, it would be Sims, it would be McDuffie. But you mentioned the inconsistencies with Sims. So he's not really going much in any of our drafts. And McDuffie, if anything, more of a late round flyer, and probably more of a late round flyer in P5 leagues only.
I will say one just last note. Of course, I always in podcasts pick players to talk about that I don't know how to say their names, just for some random reason. But PJ Harris, converted wide receiver to tight end. I think he might start this year. Chip Long throws to his tight ends a bunch, averages around 30 receptions a season. So potential sleeper there. But other than that, I'm not interested in Georgia Tech this year.
What about over at Virginia Tech? Any interest there? Because this is another program, changing of the guard, right? They bring in Grant Wells, quarterback from Marshall, who played for Cramsey last year at Marshall. Now, change of a system here at Virginia Tech. We're really not sure what we're going to get from the Hokies this year. What about Virginia Tech, Mike?
I was hoping to hear a lot more of Malachi Thomas in the spring, but I think he is going to come out as a starter. He didn't do anything to hurt his standing in that running back room, but you wanted to just kind of hear more out of spring reports of a sophomore quarterback or sophomore running back taking that second year jump. You just didn't really hear that. I do think he'll start. I think it's going to be more ball controlled offense in this new offensive scheme. The offensive coordinator came from the NFL. He's got some NFL experience, worked with Brent Pry at Penn State. So Malachi Thomas is the only one I'm really interested in here. Quarterback, don't care. Wide receivers, maybe. Jadon Blue's got, he's got a resume, right, at Temple. So maybe he can get, 50, 60 receptions this year. But outside of Malachi Thomas, I'm steering clear again.
Yeah, we're together on that. They lose Tavion Robinson, who transferred to Kentucky, right? So they bring in Jadon Blue from Temple. We really don't know what we're going to get there. And, you and I both mentioned we're interested in Malachi Thomas, a little bit more of an intriguing option because we're not sure what we're going to get. And you just have a feeling the potential's there. But is it going to be really worth the risk to invest some draft capital? And that's where some of your draft league specs and how big your format in regards to conference specific or full FBS comes into play. But I'm with you. Malachi Thomas, really, for me and you, the only players as of interest there.
Yeah, you don't have to spend, just last note, you don't have to spend a lot of draft capital on Malachi Thomas. So that's the good news. And if they use kind of Thomas as they did those Penn State running backs back when Pry and the OC were there, I mean, they use them in the passing game, could be a decent option.
Now let's move over to Pitt, Mike, where there's tons of changes at quarterback. Obviously, Keaton Slovis coming in from USC, but they lose Jordan Addison to USC. So now with Addison leaving, it's probably created more questions than we have answers now going into 2022. We know they brought in Kanata Mumpfield from Akron, who you and I are sort of projecting, as that top wideout in that offense. Can Keaton Slovis kind of recapture that freshman season form? What about the Panthers, man? What are you looking for from Pitt this offseason or going into 2022? Or you have any players, that you're honing in on there? And I think Mumpfield is probably one for you.
He's one, probably not the guy. I think Gavin Bartholomew actually benefits the most potentially. Maybe not benefits most, but he benefits definitely because, when you lose the Biletnikoff Award winner, it's not an apples to apples. You're going to replace him with somebody. I don't think they have that guy. So I think it's more going to be a committee approach of Mumpfield and some of the other receivers and Gavin Bartholomew, who the new OC, Frank Signetti from Boston College, loved to feed his tight ends, of course, with Hunter Long, etc. from the Eagles. I think they had like 122 total targets to the tight end one over 2 years. So I think Gavin Bartholomew he's a top 10 tight end for me. I think he's going to get fed the ball here along with Mumpfield and some of the other receivers. So
yeah, I think from a value standpoint, he may be number one on our list on the Pitt roster going into the 2022 season in regards to value per position. And I know you and I talk about all the time, sometimes injuries and transfers can kind of level some things out on the depth chart. And that's the problem at running back too, where we've got Ibanaconda as their highest rated running back, but there's a lot of depth there. And I'm not sure we're really going to get a workhorse back in the Pitt backfield.
I agree. I think they just got differing skill sets where, Ibanaconda is kind of that in between the 20s. And then you bring in Rodney Hammond, who's kind of just the finisher, right? The closer. He'll put it into the end zone. But I was looking at this earlier. They bring back all 5 starters, Pitt does, along the offensive line. And then Ibanaconda only got 10 carries a game last year where, as we talked about earlier with Pat Garwo, that was 17 carries a game he got last year. So I think we could see an uptick in Ibanaconda's workload. I haven't been taking him, but maybe he's a late round option.
Now we start to transition, Mike, into the programs where we're seeing a lot more draft capital invested as we move into some of these other schools we have on the list. Let's start with the Wolfpack, NC State. Devin Leary coming off of a big year there. In regards to running backs, I think last year it didn't really, I think we thought there'd be more production coming from the running back position, but It seems like they're going to really put a lot of faith in Devin Leary. And what does that mean for you moving into 2022? Much of the same this year?
I think so. I mean, they get 4 starters back along the offensive line. They do lose a top 10 pick from the NFL draft this past year. But I mentioned this in the guide. It was really confusing how NC State ranked 35th in line yards, yet they were 96th in rushing explosiveness last year. So something just didn't correlate. And I think you remember last year, a lot of people were super high on Bam Knight, thinking that this guy could be a possible, top 30 fantasy running back and a possible NFL draft pick. I don't recall him getting drafted, but things just didn't work out. And I'm wondering, with how the offensive line performed and the lack of explosiveness, if the running backs were an issue. So we'll see. I mean, Jordan Houston looked pretty good in the spring game, but NC State typically rotates back, so I'm not really, I don't have a ton of interest there. I think as you'll talk about, it's definitely with the passing game with the Wolves.
Yeah, no doubt. I think, with Leary throwing 30 plus touchdowns last year, there's potential to do that again, right? And so if you've got a quarterback that can go for 30 plus, I think some of the attention then goes to the receivers, right? You've got Thayer Thomas coming back at NC State. Is there a clear cut wide receiver 2 there? Is it more Carter? I think from a fantasy investment standpoint, and you and I talked about this, right? Devin Leary doesn't really offer that running threat that you'd like to have, but in best ball formats, Leary is actually a really solid option down the line with the value at where you're getting him, because his potential to maybe have some 300 plus yard games, 3 or 4 touchdown games, right? So I think from a value standpoint in best ball, Leary, there's a lot of value there. And that if he's going to throw for that many yards and 30 plus touchdowns, there has to be some value at receiver in this offense.
Yeah, I agree. But I'd also say that I think I would prefer Leary in a standard redraft over best ball. I don't have the number in front of me right now, but I think
you think more consistency than anything.
It was the consistency. I mean, you remember last year he was throwing for he threw 2 touchdowns, and I would guess over 2/3 of the games last year. Again, I don't have that right in front of me, but just the consistency that it provided, I like him better for redrafts over best.
Probably in 2 quarterback leagues, though.
Yeah, yes, in 2 quarterback leagues, I'd take him in any 1 or 2. Doesn't matter for me.
What about Florida State, Mike? Let's transition down to Tallahassee. We're talking about a quarterback in Devin Leary that's more of a pass only. And are we going to see Jordan Travis kind of go to another level this year, that he has the job all to himself? Because for me, that's,
I'll let you start this one off. This is your guy this year.
I mean, look, last year I mentioned, I thought the stars were aligned for Emory Jones had he come out of the gate at Florida, given that schedule. And I did take Emory Jones in all the drafts. I mean, look, if Emory Jones hits, it would have been a great pick, right? But it didn't. And that's what you live and die sometimes with your drafts. Jordan Travis is one of those guys. For me, he might be my Emory Jones of this year. I've got him in my first 2 best ball drafts. I'm getting him ahead of the spots where some of the best ball drafts I've seen you've been, where his ADP goes. I really like the guy. This was a player that you and I projected out, and we looked at his projections and said, damn, we really can't rank him that high. Can we? Look where his projections are coming out. But he's a guy that projected really high compared to where we ranked him. And I like that value if he sticks in this offense.
We're referencing our previous best balls. I had no issue. I had plenty of shares of Jordan Travis, right? Averaged 22 points a game, something around that last year, or let's see, 27 points per game, 27 points per game over the last 7 weeks, topped 20 fantasy points, over half the season. So I like Jordan Travis. My issue with where you drafted him personally is I thought you could get him in a few rounds later, but I have plenty of shares. What I like about Jordan Travis this year is the fact that he doesn't have a Mackenzie Milton behind him that you might see a 2 quarterback, split. I think it's a true freshman potentially behind him, or a redshirt freshman. It's Jordan Travis's job this year. So I do like that. Got to stay healthy. He's got that slim frame. So
Mike, I'm the Elon Musk of college fantasy football. I'm just here to drive share. I'm just here to drive up his share, Mike. That's why I'm taking him a lot earlier.
Yeah, thank you for driving up all that Emory Jones share.
Well, look, it is what it is. Look, sometimes you read the tea leaves. We talk about this all the time. Sometimes you strategically you look at the schedule, you look at the potential of the player, and you've got to make the call, right? And sometimes you hit, sometimes you miss. I remember back in the days with Lamar Jackson, I was really on him before he broke out. I actually missed. I remember missing on the days. Who was that damn Notre Dame quarterback that just never did work out? I can't remember. What's that?
Not Ian Book. Ian Book?
No, before him. I can't even remember.
Kaiser? Deshaun Kaiser?
I don't remember. It was a bust.
At least you didn't rank Spencer Sanders in the top 5.
Look, we all have our Spencer Sanders and our Emory Jones. That's what makes it fun, though, man. If we didn't look, you and I never claim to hit all the time, right? We miss just as
nobody does. Well, some people in this industry claim to think that they hit all the time after the season.
We're only human. The only thing we try to do is give them insight to try to help them make decisions. If I drive up the Jordan Travis stock, then so be it. I'm on the Jordan Travis train, man. So, let's go over to Wake Forest, where you've got one of the best offenses coming back, and a lot of pieces are back as well, starting with Sam Hartman at quarterback, A.T. Perry at receiver, arguably one of the top 3 receivers I think we have in both of our rankings. Hartman, I'm going to address this now. There might be a little questions in regards to rankings and projections. The projections that we do on the site do not incorporate interceptions. Some leagues minus points for interceptions, so you don't really see Hartman, even though he's projected as somewhere around the top 3. He's more ranked around the 5 or 6 number, and I think both of our rankings. But man, there's nothing not to like about this Wake Forest offense. And for me, and this was something that you and I have discussed, the big question for a team that's going to throw the ball as much as Wake Forest is not necessarily Hartman. It's not necessarily A.T. Perry, but there's going to be a valuable wide receiver 2 in this offense, whether it's Taylor Moore and whether it's Donovan Green. Could it be Keyshawn Williams, right? There's a little bit of uncertainty around that wide receiver 2 right now, where we know there's going to be tremendous value given the history of this offense.
Yeah, I noted it in the guide. And it was interesting because, and I'll preface it by saying this: I'm a huge Donovan Green fan. I have multiple shares of his in some of my dynasty leagues. But if you just look back since 2016, the slot receiver at Wake Forest has been either the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 in every single year. Okay, A.T. Perry, cemented in stone, wide receiver 1. If the trend holds, and we know with college fantasy football, trend doesn't always hold, but percentages would say that the wide receiver 2 is going to be the slot receiver in this offense. Taylor Moore, the likely candidate to step into that Jaquari Roberson slot receiver role, 112 vacated targets. The only hesitation there is that Keyshawn Williams, a sophomore, is also very good, going to get some time in the slot. So, you say there's going to be multiple valuable wide receivers in this offense, and I think that will be the case. Do we see, a Perry and Roberson type, where it's a solidified wide receiver 1, solidified wide receiver 2, and some separation? Or is it just kind of Perry and everybody else is just getting 40, 50 catches and just a guessing game between that group,
Yep. What about over at, let's go to Clemson, Mike. This is going to be really a hot button topic too, because you and I talked about all the time, DJU at quarterback last year, arguably one of the busts of the 2021 season. Is he going, thoughts, is he going to make it through the 2022 season as a starting quarterback, you think, or you think the young guy, was it Cade Klubnik coming in, think he takes the job? What's your feeling on this?
I think 2 things. If the spring game is any indication, Cade Klubnik's going to start this year. I think DJU in my personal opinion, looked like the exact same quarterback. A lot of overthrows, a lot of inaccuracy. Now, granted, spring game can't take away, can't cement all your opinions based on spring games. You get in trouble doing that. And he faced the Clemson defense. The defensive line just mauled that offensive line during the spring game. So you give a little leeway to DJU there. But I thought Cade Klubnik looked right on par with DJU during the spring game. And I think we'll find out very quickly if you look at that schedule. Georgia Tech on the road week 1. I think me and you both agreed if DJU doesn't perform well that game, I think you're going to see both of them that following week. And if Klubnik outshines DJU, then I think he's getting the hook.
It's something that you and I talked about, because what we look at sometimes, and I know I do, is the schedule part of how that plays in, particularly with a young quarterback. And that road game at Georgia Tech could be very telling, because if DJU struggles or if Klubnik is able to get some playing time in that game and looks good, they've got Furman right on deck and Louisiana Tech, 2 games that fit perfectly in the schedule to kind of develop a young quarterback before they head into conference play. And so I'm just as concerned with you. I have been staying away from DJU. You and I have projected him quarterback 1, but I have to tell you, man, it's a slippery slope. And I think, you would probably agree, if you're drafting DJU in best ball formats, might be wise to handcuff him with Klubnik later on in the draft, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're going to find out within the first 3 weeks how this is going to go. And, Clemson's not a school these days where I think you get a ton of leeway, especially after the year they had last year. They're going to be calling for Klubnik if DJU struggles at opening week.
And I don't want to pass over Clemson real quick too, without mentioning that both you and I feel that running back Will Shipley he's going to get a heavier workload this year, which is, sort of justifies where we have him, justifies our ranking of him. Right. I mean, we feel like we're going to get a heavier dose of Will Shipley this year in that Clemson backfield, which is why we have him ranked highly this year.
Yeah, it's weird. I've been not avoiding, but I don't see myself going up. I've done 20, 30 drafts at this point this offseason. I don't think I have one share of Will Shipley. It's not to say I don't like the player, but Kobe Pace was a rock solid running back 2 last year, and Phil Maffa was the talk of the spring with Clemson running back. So it's something just weary about that Clemson backfield that I think potentially they could split it up a little bit, but yeah, as of now, Will Shipley running back 1 there.
Well, let's head down to Coral Gables, Mike. Miami's there. Josh Gaddis comes in as offensive coordinator from Michigan. I think the big question that everybody has is are his shackles off, or did Harbaugh have him shackled up at Michigan? Are we going to see a little bit more of an open offense? We know what they have in Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback. They like what they have in Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback. So what are you looking for from Miami this offseason as we go into 2022's preseason?
I'm mostly interested in the backfield. Gaddis at Michigan, you can debate whether or not he had the shackles on him with regards to the play calling. He developed into that role the longer he was there in Ann Arbor. So, I mean, it was his offense, I believe, especially that last year where Harbaugh wasn't looking over his shoulders. And I think what Gaddis does best with the offense is, and this is kind of just basic coach speak, but he tailors the scheme to his personnel, right? And he puts his players in the best position to succeed, yada, yada. That's standard coach speak. But I think Gaddis does a really good job of that. And you look at the Miami personnel, offensive line should be decent. I think, you saw some different running schemes or run blocking schemes in the spring game that looked better than years past. And they got a deep stable of running backs, right? Jalen Knighton looked explosive last year. I don't think he's big enough to shoulder the, 200 carries there. So probably going to split it up with Henry Parrish. I'm mostly interested to see Trevante Citizen the true freshman running back who's, some quotes of that program, just reading articles, call him the best running back prospect in the last 20 years. And he's the most well-rounded of that group, I believe, once he steps on campus. He wasn't there in the spring, but I think you just kind of read the articles around that, and eventually people think that he's going to take over that job at some point full time, and then utilize Parrish and Knighton as kind of the scat backs that they really are. So, keep in mind Trevante Citizen as maybe a second half flyer on the waivers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something you and I had spoken about, because I know we've taken a couple of questions as well in regards to Jalen Knighton's ranking, right? I mean, considering how he played last year after missing the first 4 games, you would, conventional wisdom would think we would have him draft, ranked higher going into this season. But you mentioned Parrish coming over from Ole Miss. You've got Citizen coming in, who is a more complete, bigger back as well. And so you just wonder, Knighton fits in, he fits within a role, and you worried about, his limited ability in regards to not being able to be a workhorse back. You worry about his size in that regards. And so you do have a deep backfield. And so I do think it is worth mentioning that's why a player like Jalen Knighton, while being explosive, isn't necessarily ranked as high as where I think some people were expecting him to land when we dropped that preseason fantasy draft guide.
Yeah, just to close the loop on Miami. I'm confident, Tyler Van Dyke's the top 30 fantasy quarterback this year. I know there's some hesitation with offensive play caller, some of the unknowns there. I think the bigger concern is wide receiver. They were heavy in the portal looking at Jalen Robinson. I think they threw the bag potentially at Jordan Addison, and he obviously went elsewhere. They've been looking at wide receivers. They haven't been able to get one. So maybe you see more tight end usage. They got 2 good ones in Will Mallory and Elijah Arroyo. Gaddis used his tight ends plenty at Michigan. So I think you could potentially see 20 plus receptions for both those guys.
That's a good point. And something that I think is worth mentioning as well. I think you and I have ranked Tyler Van Dyke a little higher. Tyler Van Dyke, he's ranked a little higher than where his projections played out. So if we're going to mention one way in regards to Jordan Travis, how, he projected higher than where we had him ranked, Tyler Van Dyke, on the flip side of that coin, we rank a little higher than his projection. And that just speaks to the upside that he has at quarterback.
Consistency. Yeah. He threw last 6 games. I think he threw for 316 yards or more. It's just, It's consistency that bumps up quarterbacks or players in general in our rankings.
But let's go, there's a lot of clarity there at quarterback at Miami, Mike, but not much so at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This one, as we get into the last 4 programs here, we can spend a few minutes here because there's, Josh Downs comes back at UNC. There's questions maybe, in the backfield, possibly. But there's definitely questions at quarterback where, you've got May, you've got Criswell. We can go either way here. This is something that you and I have talked about quite a bit, and I've even raised questions on whether or not I'm even on the right side of the coin in the Drake May, Jacoby Criswell quarterback conversation. Where are you landing right now?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is Drake May. And I know, I see people online that are North Carolina fans that also kind of make the argument for Drake May, but watching the spring game, I don't know how you can come to the conclusion that Drake May outperformed Criswell. And I think it was the exact opposite. I liked what I saw from Criswell. He's getting a lot of pub in the spring. I think he struggled, maybe not struggled, the right word, but I think he was lacking in some of in maybe a leadership department, or maybe he wasn't as vocal in the QB room or with the offense in general. And I think you kind of I've seen quotes from Josh Downs that say he's improved in that facet. Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator, said Jacoby Criswell's got one of the strongest arms he's ever had at quarterback. So it's not to say that Drake May played poorly. I liked what Criswell, what he looked like during the spring game. And I think it's a 50-50 split at this point. I think you have to handcuff if you're drafting one of the 2. And I think there's I haven't been drafting them. I think there's a real possibility, especially in that first month, we could see both quarterbacks. So
yeah, it's interesting because, again, we're going to reference the schedule where UNC opens up against Florida A&M, but what really could determine the outcome of this quarterback battle, ironically, could be the following two games when North Carolina, they don't play in conference. They actually play two Sun Belt opponents. They play at Appalachian State and at Georgia State. And, I was telling somebody this not that long ago. Those are two tricky games for North Carolina, not being settled at quarterback. Appalachian State and Georgia State are going to be two programs that are going to be ready for them to come at them. And, I'm wondering that Florida A&M, Appalachian State game, Georgia State, and then they're off before they get Notre Dame at home. And I'm just wondering if we're really even going to see any clarity at quarterback until we're 2-3 games into the season here. That, we made the call on Criswell, and a lot of it, had to do with what, the observations that we made. There's a lot of people calling for May. I think it could be back and forth, but to that point, that's the reason why neither UNC quarterback is ranked within our top 40 going into the summer.
Yeah, somebody posed a good question on Twitter. It's like, you had Sam Howell top 5 at some point. You have Phil Longo quarterbacks ranked in the top 20 consistently, yet you have May or Criswell down in the 40s, 50s. Why is that? And I think it's exactly that we are probably going to see two quarterbacks in the first game, potentially the second game, potentially the third game. So that decreases value right there.
Yeah, you and I talk about this a lot, and I know it's been something that I've mentioned to you, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself with another conference that we're going to be talking about. But I mentioned it to you, the UNC and the LSU quarterback battles for me were positions going into drafts right now that if you're drafting one, you almost have to draft two. And I feel like that with Criswell and May right now. If you're in any of our best ball drafts, if someone's drafting May and not drafting Criswell, I feel like it's a mistake. And if they're doing the other way, I feel like it's a mistake. I almost feel like at this particular stage right now, it's a 2-for-1. It's a package deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say you have to pair them in best ball where we're doing no transactions, right? If you pick one, potentially you could pick it up on the waiver wire that, when the season's happening. But for best ball, definitely have to handcuff.
Well, look, we're going to go to another program with questions. Mike, UVA, where Brock and Mendenhall retired. Robert Ene leaves. So they bring in Des Kitchen at Virginia. The talk is that they'd like to be balanced. You and I watched the spring game. The run game didn't look any better. The way the roster's set up, it's still geared towards the talent is in the passing attack with the returning players that they have coming back with Wicks and Thompson and Kemp and Armstrong. But there is some hesitation with UVA, yet we have Brennan Armstrong ranked high again. So let's spend a couple of minutes on UVA, your take there and what you're looking at.
You mentioned the running game didn't look good. Well, the passing game didn't look good either. We have more proof in the pudding that the Virginia passing game they've done it, right? They did it last year, but changing the system didn't look so good in the spring game either. I strictly remember just one interception that Brennan Armstrong tried to throw it to the outside hash and just threw it right to the defender. It did not look smooth, did not look good. I am very hesitant here. I'm hesitant, but I can also see a path to success, right? When I was just putting notes here for Virginia, I don't know if it was a specific boxer or if it's just a boxing term in general, but it's where you got to plan until you get hit in the mouth, right? And Virginia's plan right now is they want to be balanced. They want to run the football. Well, guess what? You have 0 starters back on the offensive line. I think your probably defense might be, decent to good. But, you're going to try to be balanced. Well, when you're down 3 touchdowns, you can't really be balanced anymore, right? So the strength of this roster is in the passing game, and you'll talk about it too. So I can see a path to success, but I am just concerned about this OC change, the head coaching change in general. Des Kitchings, offensive coordinator, when he was the play caller at NC State, the 1 year, 2019, they went 4-8, averaged 22 points a game. They did finish 19th in pace and averaged 39 passing attempts per game. So you get a bit of the good and bad, but it was not a successful stint as an offensive play caller. So I'm worried about this situation.
This is one for me where I don't like to put a lot of stock in the spring because of the transition, because we have a proven quarterback that has done it. We have a proven supporting cast there. You mentioned the problem with the offensive line. Most of the time, the inexperienced offensive line does lead to problems with running. UVA didn't run the ball well last year anyway. I do think you're right. We agree with that. I think UVA may say they want to be as, two-dimensional as possible, but I think when it comes down to it, we're going to see Armstrong throwing the ball 35 plus times per game, and which is why we still have him ranked highly. They didn't look great in the spring. They're a program in transition, but we know where the strength of the roster is. We know Armstrong's coming back, and we know the weapons that he has coming back, and they're all at receiver, right? I mentioned it. You've got Kemp, you've got Thompson, you've got Wicks, and I even think they get Rashawn Henry, who came back from a couple of years ago. That got hurt. So all
Lavelle
the strength,
Davis.
right.
Lavelle Davis. Lavelle Davis, not Ray.
That's right. That's right. So the strength with UVA is in the passing attack. And so I think if things do break down, like you mentioned, and their record's not great and their defense wasn't any good last year, so they could be improved this year, but improvement could be relative, right? And so we could see UVA still throw the ball a ton. The question is, are we going to get the efficiency at which they did it last year? And I think that's really the big concern going into 2022 with UVA's offense.
Yeah, I would say too that, I mean, you mentioned the turnover on the offensive line, how, they're trying to be balanced, but they might struggle in the run game. Well, that could also affect, I know Brennan Armstrong's a scrambler, but you have a bad offensive line, you don't want him running around with his head cut off either. So, yeah, I have my reservations. If Brennan Armstrong drops to a certain point in the draft, I think you just have to take him because of what he proved last year, but not a guy that I'm drafting in the first 3 rounds personally.
Well, it's interesting. The reason why we changed up the order of the teams that we're going in is because we're transitioning straight to Syracuse, where last year UVA's offensive coordinator, Robert Ane, landed, right? So he's now with Dino Babers at Syracuse. He inherits an offense and a running back in Sean Tucker that was just lights out last year. You've got Garrett Schrader, who played really well from a fantasy standpoint. But the big question for you and I, we have Schrader ranked high. Can he do what Ane needs him to do in that offense and keep that job as Syracuse's starting quarterback? Isn't that the big question we have in 2022 with Syracuse this year?
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest question, obviously. I think the scheme change helps. I think Robert Ane, he's definitely he's a mastermind at getting his quarterbacks into the best situations. I think just to make some real easy throws, I think is one of his best attributes as an offensive play caller. Whether that's just chucking it downfield like they did last year to Dontavian Wicks or finding Billy Kemp underneath, I think that scheme can help Garrett Schrader succeed this year potentially. The other part of the dynamic is backup Justin Lamson, who looked really good in the spring, is injured. Now there's a little ambiguity as to what his injury is. I think it's a knee injury. I think it's potentially an ACL, but they're calling it undisclosed and out for an indefinite amount of time, right? So we don't have proof that he's going to be out for the season or long term or anything like that. But with Lamson out, I think that bodes well for Schrader having that job for the full season, which we were kind of worried about with Lamson performing well in the spring.
Yeah, and let's put a couple of other things on the spotlight or make some comparisons, right? Ane's done some work with some really good quarterbacks. Remember what he did with Bryce Perkins and the fantasy factor that he made him at UVA. He did the same thing with Brennan Armstrong, right? So we have some examples of where he's done it with some quarterbacks and turned some guys into, some fantasy factors. I think the other question, if there's a 1B, was how does he coming in affect Sean Tucker and his value? I think if nothing would have changed, all things considered at Syracuse, you and I probably would have Tucker ranked a little bit higher going into 2022. In Ane's offense, he's only had one 1,000-yard back in the history of his offense, and that was the first year he took over and inherited the offense over at BYU, where he inherited Jamal Williams. Now, that might be the only 1,000-yard back, but it also is an example of an offense that he inherited and maybe tailored to the strength of his roster, which is where we can see things playing out this year over at Syracuse. And so if that is an example of what might happen over at Syracuse, we could see where Sean Tucker would then be one of those top 12, 15 backs in 2022. Because one of the bigger questions that you and I debated back and forth is, does Ane come in and adapt his style to his personnel, or he's going to try to adapt his personnel to his system? And we have to think with Tucker there and with the success they had last year, that there's somewhat of a marriage between these two systems. And I do think we're going to see Sean Tucker will be a fantasy factor this year.
100% agree. I think it's just a matter of Virginia had trash running backs, right? They didn't have a stud back there, so he had nobody to give it to. I mean, I know you see, looking back the last 6-7 years, I think running back one averaged around 150 carries per year, but when he had a decent to solid running back in Jordan Ellis those 2 years, he had back-to-back 200 carry seasons. So we might see a decrease in volume from Sean Tucker, but I think he easily crosses that 200 carry mark this year.
And simply, it could play into the factor of just how good is Syracuse going to be? And it's something that you and I talk about. Is this a team that's going to be playing from behind, or are they going to be playing out in front? Because if they're playing from behind, we'll have to see them throw the ball a little bit more. If they're in every game, then we're going to see Tucker get utilized more often.
Better hope that they're ahead, because you don't want to see Garrett Schrader throw it too much.
Well, look, Mike, we've got one more team here. We've got the Louisville Cardinals. I've got Cunningham as my QB1 this season. I just think for what he has done over the course of the last 2 seasons and his consistency, what Louisville has coming back, they don't have a ton of proven depth at receiver, but they have some talent. They've got tight end, depth good tight end coming back. They've got a bevy of running backs. The concern and question for me isn't at Mikael Cunningham. It isn't at Malik Cunningham. What is it? What did I say? Malik?
It's Malik. It's Malik. He's changed it a few times.
Yeah, well, exactly. Isn't Cunningham at quarterback? You and I have a lot of discussion about running back, where they brought in Tyon Evans in from Tennessee. You've got Trevion Cooley, who you like as arguably the most talented running back on the roster, and you've got Jalen Mitchell coming off a solid spring and last year's starter. Where is that sort of, you and I have talked about Louisville running back quite a bit. So I think we can kind of take a minute here and spend some time. Where are you seeing things shake out? Because when you look at the history of this offense, that running back one has really been productive here.
1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns over the last 8 years under Satterfield. So if he's going to find one this year, you better hope to identify him, because obviously he's going to boom in this offense, especially with a quarterback like Malik Cunningham, just in the backfield with them. So I am landing with Cooley right now. And part of the reason I do think he's the most talented back in that backfield. But again, this is a situation where put all your personal biases aside and look at and read who is covering this team on a daily basis. And you got 24/7 Sports, their top beat writer, and the Louisville Courier-Journal top beat writer for Louisville, both stating in articles that Trevion Cooley is the starter coming out of spring ball, right?
Yeah.
I know Jalen Mitchell popped in the spring game. You see some preseason magazines projecting him as running back one, but we also saw him last year and he fluttered. He did not perform up to expectations. So I am completely not completely, but I'm personally dismissing him from potentially being the running back one. I think you look to the upstart and Cooley. I think he played well in the spring, the bowl game last year to kind of cap off the season. And that's who I'm sticking with personally. I think maybe you in some of our best balls where there's no transactions, you maybe look to handcuff with a Tyon Evans or even a Jalen Mitchell if that's suits your fancy. But I'm sticking with Cooley here, and until I hear otherwise or read otherwise, I should see, not hear.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with Cooley here.
And this is where you and I got into some, we kind of went back and forth because I was, I'm sort of on the side of the fence that you bring in a big play guy like Tyon Evans, who I feel really can make this offense even more dynamic with Cunningham. I believe he's going to have a certain role in this offense. I like Louisville. I think their offense could be really good this year. The question is, really, are we going to get investment in a real running back one and see that heavy workload? I've got my fingers crossed for you with Cooley. I happen to think that Tyon Evans is going to have a significant role in this offense. But the one thing that I think you and I can both agree on is that we could, whatever happens, we could see a guy like Cunningham. Is he going to be, and this is obviously where my chips are all in, he's going to be more of that vulture inside the red zone, inside the 5-yard line again. And really what makes Cunningham more of that quarterback one for me and a top 3 quarterback for us together, I think, is just the threat that he has running the ball and how consistent. You talked about the onset of the show, the consistency at quarterback. Well, when you have a consistency at quarterback that not only can throw the ball, but can do it on the ground, like Cunningham did last year, rushing for multiple touchdowns in almost every single game on the schedule last year, that really does wonders for your fantasy roster.
4 starters back on the OL. He reduced his interceptions to 6 last year, which is very impressive. And I was looking at this too. I know this is your thing, but looking at the schedule right out of the gate, you get at Syracuse and then UCF. And I'm thinking over under in the 70s potentially in those games. There's going to be shootouts because I think Syracuse and UCF are going to put up points against Louisville. So should be fun right out of the gate.
Yep. Well, look, we're out of the gate and we've had fun. We've already done 2 shows, AAC and the ACC, Mike. So, we're going to get, we've still got a good bit to go, but this is a good start so far to the conference preview series. And so that's about it. Just to remind everyone, the Discord's popping, a lot of subscribers coming in, the fantasy draft guide, the preseason fantasy projections, all available on the site. Head on over there, do what you got to do, get in now. And like Mike said on yesterday on the AAC show, and I touched on as well, the sooner you get in, this, the more you can see the process and the evolution of some of these guys moving up and down the rankings as we go throughout the summer. But that's going to be it. We're going to shotgun these shows, but that's it, Mike. We're done with the ACC. So for Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo. That's going to do it for another edition of the preseason preview series, the ACC. Until next time, guys, we'll see you on the next show.